That's exactly right. So if we move on to setting training zones, we can get very like caught up in the 20-minute, the 5K run, the 10K run, the 400, 200 meter CSS swim time trials. But in actual fact, like Matt showed in his study, there's like an underlying fundamental, as we showed in that crossover like continuum of the energy system graph, that we're just trying to get a threshold, and there are so many ways you can go about it. Like what are some of the ways you use, Matt?
We've tried actually all of these. So we've had people in the lab so many times, right? Measuring
Yeah.
oxygen uptake, and then we're
Yep.
trying to like see where the oxygen uptake breaks, and they start taking in more and producing more CO2, and there's the RER. And then we're looking at ways to measure the gas exchange threshold using some like a V-slope method, and just really complicated methods. And
Actually,
critical power.
on that, like I don't know how many VO2 max tests I've done, at least a couple hundred. I've probably done about 50 myself. I've got more useful data out of real world testing, like a 5K running time trial, than I have out of like hardcore scientific analysis on an athlete.
I don't think lab data is the most important thing. And even when we did have access to using the lab at the university, I would still get my athletes to just do a field test because we just were more interested in their power, and we didn't have to always look at what they were doing, what their muscles were using as fuel all the time, because we knew pretty much what was happening by looking at how their power was. So if I start working with an athlete tomorrow, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to do a field test. And the reason that's useful is because, firstly, what I can do is with that field test is I can say what their fitness is today, and we can use that to track as we go through the training. We expect them to get more fit, but we can also use that threshold test to set their training zone. So I can go into Training Peaks, set their zone, and automatically all the workouts populate themselves. And it makes it really simple for me as a coach to have the language with the athlete, and then we can get the ball rolling really simply.
Yeah, I use the same. And with running, especially trail running, a lot of zones just outside of heart rate just don't work. Like kind of the default people look at is pace and running pace. But when you're running up a hill, the pace quickly blows out. And if you're trying too hard or you're trying too easy on the downhill, it doesn't work. And then unfortunately, somehow, some way back in the day, as we get into a module 3, with heart rate, it just became age-adjusted heart rate zones. And these are default. And sometimes people don't understand the heart rate-based calculation, so they may just leave it as default. And this can really skew the information, both if you're training 2 zones and you haven't changed them like age-based, and also like if you're trying to analyze it and you're thinking, geez, this athlete is just thrashing themselves. So I always do some kind of heart rate threshold test because, man, the variance in heart rate I've seen across individuals, especially, I'll just give you an anecdote of a 50-year-old male runner that signed up, and he said, "Oh, I got to tell you, I run hot." And I was like, "Oh yeah, here we go." They all say that. They were like, "Oh, no, my heart rate's always high." It's like, yeah, because you're always training too hard. But anyway, so I set him off, gave him it's a 20-minute hill climb we have here locally to run. Very hard, but it's an amazing way to get an accurate representation of their threshold heart rate, because it's not like a flat time trial. Some athletes are always going to be able to bang out a really good 5K day in, day out. They're just super consistent. Some people get very emotional about the word time trial, and so best effort is a term I prefer to use for a lot of these kind of tests. Set them up, and sure enough, 50-year-old individual close to 200 max, like max heart rate with a sustainable average, like it's about 25 minutes. He averaged at 187, and any age-based calculation suggests that that is impossible. And his zones were just completely different, almost 40 beats different at a zone 3. So that's where, having these tests, having them reproducible, is going to create a more accurate means of training and analyzing for the coach and athlete.
Yeah, and those time trials are really hard, right? Like there are a lot of athletes, so like we get pushback sometimes, like if we test too much, and rightfully so, because if you're going all out for 20 minutes, like you're not starting all out, but you're doing an all out average effort, which is what we want to try and represent that lactate threshold. We get a lot of pushback, so we want to be really efficient with doing those time trials because we don't want to have to do them all the time, right? So if we could pick a test that's efficient and use it to set zones and gauge fitness, that's great.
Dr. Matt and I started the Performance Advantage podcast to help runners, riders, and outdoor competitors integrate sports science more effectively into their training and racing.
So over the last few years, Dr. Will and I have covered topics like the lactate threshold, training zones, power meters, and fatigue. Now we're condensing these popular and misunderstood topics into practical courses.
Our courses take our same podcasting style approach to learning and education, and we break it down into bite-sized chunks that you can digest either all at once or as practical little resources to use as and when you need them.
So the biggest difference between our course and any other course you might have taken is that we don't lecture you. It's a conversation between Will and I, and we're explaining complex sports science principles in an easy to understand manner.
Yeah, we also integrate like how we use them on the regular. Our courses come with a certificate of completion as well as a lot of takeaway resources such as training plans, scientific articles, and quizzes that you can do to check your progress along the way.
Our sports science courses are available now. Register on performanceadvantagepodcast.com for immediate access.